Good morning everyone and welcome on this cold day which is warming up.
Who's talking?
Lovely. I'm Laura Stiles and I'm the president of the Otago Settlers Association. So welcome everyone, welcome people from Owaka and people who aren't members, and if you'd like to be a member, my normal web blurb, you can join at the front desk. Another web blurb is our Christmas midwinter function is going to be on the 13th of July here at 2 o'clock, and our speaker is Dr. Jane Adams from the Dunedin Prison Trust, so that's the building opposite, so that would be really good. So if you're interested, let you know. Now, I'm going to do health and safety today. I'm naughty, I don't usually do it, but I'm doing it today. Toilets are located opposite the entrance to the auditorium, so right out there. Please, no food and drinks through the galleries. Well, that's fair enough, we can have food and drink in here. And then, like the event of evacuation, please exit through the main doors of the Josephine foyer, the ones you'd entered through. And don't just think it's a false alarm, which so many people think that I do nothing. So follow the person who will probably have an armband on, would they, Chris? Yep, they usually have an armband. Assembly point is on the footpath directly outside the museum. Please do not cross State Highway 1. That's probably a good bit of advice. You might get over the fire, but you might get run over. Finally, please follow any other instructions. Now today we're really lucky. We're going to have a talk on Remembering Les Lockerbie, and the book's been written by Malcolm Deverson. And Les Lockerbie was a teacher and an archaeologist, and he was in the Catlins area. And if you go to the Catlins Museum, there's apparently a room dedicated to him. Our speaker, Malcolm, is the author of the book Remembering Les Lockerbie. Malcolm is an ex-secondary school teacher who taught for 23 years at Greymouth High School, so I'm great he taught on the coast, that's wonderful. Spent 7 years as deputy principal at the Catlins area school in Owaka, as well as a year at Christchurch Teaching College, supporting the implementation of the latest social studies curriculum across 25 schools on the West Coast. He spent 2004 teaching at various schools in Yorkshire, UK. After teaching and up to 2016, Malcolm was project manager for the Clutha Agricultural Development Board, a largely self-funded not-for-profit which ran on-farm trials, research and development programs for farmers in the Clutha area. So that would be really interesting. I think that'd be fabulous. Malcolm and his wife Caroline retired to Moscow in 2019. The subject of Malcolm's talk today is Les Lockerbie and why we should remember him. And he also has a website, he's got copies of the book here for sale at $35. So, welcome Malcolm.
Tēnā koutou. Ko Malcolm Deverson aho. I'm an England-born New Zealander, a 5-year-old immigrant with a 10-pound pom family in 1955 on the RMS Rangatata. I grew up and went to school and university in Otago, Christchurch. I married Carolyn and had my family of 3 boys on the west coast. I've ended up in Moscow via Owaka, and through my involvement with the Catlins Historical Society, yes, I am the accidental author of this book on Les Lockerbie. Now, Les Lockerbie was born in Winton in 1911 and was 7 years old when the family moved to McLennan in the south of the Catlins. McLennan was a pioneering forestry-based community. The railway, the Catlins River Branch Railway, terminated in McLennan in 1915, and of course that opened up even more opportunities in forestry. Bridge across the McLennan River shows something of the environment that the family moved into. Father Ebenezer Lockerbie he's described as a hairdresser and tobacconist in Invercargill, even though on Leslie's birth certificate he's called a farmer. He did buy and sell land in Invercargill and McLennan, and he saw an opportunity. There were other family members in McLennan, in the McLennan area, and he saw an opportunity in the settlement and built this general store and post office in 1921. And he ran this, the family ran that until 1931. Les lived in the Catlins as a schoolboy, with secondary schooling in Balclutha, and continued as a teacher in the Catlins until 1942. Now I'll come back to some of that later on. He lived most of his life in Ōtepoti, Dunedin, but he's certainly considered by Catlins people as one of their own. Perhaps he is one of the few individuals to have completed a substantive part of his life's work in and about the Catlins. So I'm going to have a look at the life's work of this local legend. My written stuff says that you probably haven't heard of him, but I don't think that's the case now that I look in the audience. So I guess we can look at many historical figures and say they were born at exactly the right time, and that's the case with Les. His interest in archaeology was fostered by his father from the early age of 7 or 8, when together they explored the rivers, the estuary and the seashores around their McLennan home. Les's father, Eb, was keenly interested in Maori history. He actually went to the North Island, and especially around Rotorua area, in 1919 to have a look at Maori culture. This is a Scottish immigrant into New Zealand. Les continued his interest through his teenage years. Just as in the 1930s, New Zealand, archaeology was ripe for change in process and the use of scientific methods. Victorian and early 20th century architecture were basically about collecting stuff, collecting curios. They fossicked and scratched and dug into the earth for items of interest or value and displayed them in cabinets of curiosity such as this. This is from a museum in Germany. This is the Sir John Stones Museum in London, an amazing building of all sorts of collected stuff, borrowed obviously from places like Greece and Italy, and this a museum in the United States. And there are certainly many such fossicked items in homes and cribs along the Catlins coast, many other places in New Zealand. In New Zealand in the 1930s, and of course for Les Lockerbie, on the Catlins coast, much of the interest was in any evidence of the earliest Maori settlers in the land and their association with the moa, seen as these huge birds that were certainly in people's consciousness, but not probably well understood. The earliest Maori at the time were given the label moa hunters, as I hope to show through this talk that although they did hunt moa, this is a limiting and not complete description of these earliest settlers. The current term used by historians is early Maori, although archaic Maori is also used at times, has been used. I'll go through some... At this point, I'd like to go through some general understanding so you know what I'm talking about in terms of early Maori as opposed to classic Maori. Les collected items from both. I'm not going to talk too much about the years involved. They're sort of still discussed by archaeologists and historians. Where are we? Basically, early Maori arrived at the coast and tended to stay at the coast with, as the years went by, seasonal hunting inland, hunting moa and other food. They were campsites near the sea rather than formal villages that we understand more with classic Maori culture, more permanent settlements, and there's, especially in the North Island, moving inland where they could grow food and the foods that they brought with them from the islands. The early Maori diet was obviously what they could find, something like 50 birds or sources of food that were available to early Maori. Early on, obviously, lots of moa, and we're talking thousands and thousands of moa as when they arrived. Seals, birds, berries, and later in that period, largely fish, seafood. As opposed to the more classic Maori, what we understand, they gathered food from the sea too, but also the cultivated ground and cultivated the yams, kumara and taro that they brought from the islands. Social structure is a bit harder to nail down from archaeological finds, but we suspect it was much as in the Polynesian islands that they came from, perhaps extended family groups. I have in my mind 50 and 100 in a family group that might have moved around different areas at different seasons, as opposed to classic Maori tribal situations that became more rigid perhaps, or more permanent, with certainly a hierarchical social structure. No weapons, dedicated weapons anyway, have been found in any of the southern early Maori sites, and certainly nothing like the indications of a warrior culture that grew up after the 17th century. Cultural practices, perhaps that is easier to identify through archaeological finds. Distinctive real necklaces I'll talk about a bit later on. Using bone, shell, stone. Probable wooden items, of course, that none of which we've been able to find because they've disappeared, as opposed to more intricate work in classic Maori times and more use of pounamu. There is pounamu in classic Maori, early Maori sites, but certainly not as much, and it doesn't look to have been perhaps prized quite as much, perhaps. So the early settlement was that. It was an initial settlement phase, and they were adapting to this foreign land. And later on, with a larger influx in the 17th century, a more established culture was built up over time. Les's first involvement in a more planned archaeological dig after his young charging around finding stuff was with David Teviotdale. Teviotdale was doing field work for the Otago Museum at this stage in the Papadawai area between 1936 and 1939. Les spent his school holidays, he was teaching at the time, helping Teviotdale, who was in the latter stages of his career as a cataloguer and collector of artefacts. So Lockerbie's first claim to fame is his approach to these excavations. It was clearly known that archaeological finds would be in layers or strata below the surface, but Les could see that it was crucial if you were going to make claims about the dates of things or association between artefacts to excavate and record these layers carefully. He didn't just scratch and dig and collect, as the fossickers and many professional archaeologists had been doing. Les drew very detailed site maps and meticulously noted the layers and the precise locations of the artefacts found. Not everyone at the time believed that moa was still here when the earliest Polynesian settlers came to New Zealand, but if an oven with fish and seal or penguin bones was found at the same depth as a stratum containing moa bones or moa bone fish hooks, then it could be fairly claimed that moa was indeed at that site at the time of early Maori. And so Les was able to show the links between moa and early Maori at many of the sites he worked at. And I've just done a couple of slides. You aren't supposed to read what's on the right, just an indication of the material he left for us, showing how precise he was and where things were buried and at times what he dug up. And the left says he was quite an artist as well in doing some of his work. That's a fairly detailed one indicating stuff from Bonawea. I've blown it up a bit more for you. And you can see the sort of things that were being dug up from dog bones, goose, moa, seals, what else can I see? Albatross, kaka, kiwi, tite, eagle, the works basically was available for them to eat and for us to find bones of later. So before that, I'll go back, because Les made significant change in accepted practice. Site maps and strata diagrams became the norm for professional archaeologists after Les's example. So this is Les's claim to fame, number one. Les was just at the right time in history to be at the forefront of the developing concept of radiocarbon dating. Athol Rafter It was a nuclear chemist from Wellington who brought the C14 concept, the idea of dating artefacts, organic artefacts based on the decay of the C14 isotope, back from a government-sponsored study trip to the United States, Canada and England. He became New Zealand's pioneer in the field at the Dominion Laboratory, testing the first New Zealand samples in 1953. They're likely to have been Les's samples from Ponawea and Tākaupa River mouth. Over the years, Rafter led the world in refining C14 techniques with associates in America for even greater accuracy when dating samples. In 1959, he became the inaugural director of the DSIR's Institute of Nuclear Sciences in Lower Hutt, where he worked until 1978. His laboratory here was one of the world's first radiocarbon dating facilities. So Les's practice of carefully noting the strata and then carbon dating of the organic materials found enabled some dates to be put with the strata to track periods. As I say, I'm not going to talk too much about the dates, but this is his diagram from Anthropology of the South Seas. So Les was more than a foot soldier in these developments. He was quickly seen as pivotal in the testing process. He collected C14 samples and sent them to Lower Hutt, coordinated early samples from other archaeologists, and was involved in analysis and research with Rafter. So his work was hugely significant in leading to improvements in dating processes during the 1950s and beyond. And this is Les's claim to fame, number 2. The major contribution by Les was, of course, the fact that he found thousands of artefacts across a great number of southern sites. And I've popped in a map here of the sites that he was working at. I've got this buzzer thing, haven't I? I didn't get taught how to point, but we'll try a few buttons. Oh, that wasn't a good one.
Where am I pointing?
Oh, thank you for the pointer, yes. In the middle, centre of Otago, he went to the Hawksburn, inland from Alexandra. He had a look at rocks there too that were relevant to the coastal situation. He went to Sutherland Sound in the fieldland there. I've actually, good job too, I've highlighted the areas more around Dunedin. And he was working at these sites off and on, more or less constantly, and several at the same time, often. So he deposited these finds in the museum of the appropriate area. So the hundreds are in the Otago Museum. Many more Catlins items in his own private collection that he used to study from are in the Owaka Museum, and his Stewart Island finds are in the Stewart Island Museum. So he was investigating at a variety of sites, some for the museum and some for the Otago Archaeological Society, and some with family and friends as his own holidays. And I've just thrown in a couple of family type slides. He had his family with him all the way on this, and it's important to mention that his wife Ina was very cooperative and supportive in all this work that he was doing. Now, I've got some early artefacts. Sally's going to help me with this. And I've got 5 packets of artefacts here of actual, 800-year-old bits of rock that are really fascinating. They've all got what they are in them. And if you could circulate them round so they don't run into each other, that would be handy. If they go that way around the room, would that be a good idea? And you can take them out if you want to, but please put the bits and pieces back. There's funny little pieces of paper that are the code numbers for the museum. And Mike will growl at me if I mess them up too much. So I'm going to show a small clip here of Les talking about some artefacts. Let's go.
Yeah, what sort of artefacts are we found? Well, the most significant one was the what we call quartzite knife, and a larger one, a chopper like you find them in the Moana levels, and the quartzite knives have, the edges have been retouched, making a saw edge that make them cut better, and really quite sharp. And that rock comes from inland quite a bit, so they must have been here with time to go inland and find the rock, and then know how to make it into these big blades, because they're distinctive to the Moana period in this area. Then adzes of various sizes, a particularly large one, and they flaked it out by knocking chips off until they got the shape, and then bruised the surface, again with a hammerstone like this, bruised the surface, and then finally, after bruising the surface and getting it well shaped ready, they've made the edge here the way they want it, and then this little one here explains it better, in that it's been polished with a polisher, and I haven't got one quite handy here, but they've left the bruised piece up here because that is where it would be lashed against the handle. It'd be hafted like that, and the lashing would go around there, and that piece has been left rough to take the lashing, and the blade and the cutting edge is sharp, and it cuts a very, very good chip. It'll take a chip out of a piece of green wood with it.
Right, that's from a program called Clutha Country, and they were some outtakes that the museum has, and Les is at Papatawai there. So I've got a couple of, I think I've gone too fast. I've got a couple of sites to talk about here. The first one is the Tākopa Rivermouth site. It really would be a good idea if I could point this thing.
Is there a button that looks like a bomb?
Sorry?
Is there a button that looks like a bomb? That might be it.
Yes, three. Thank you. The site is at this promontory here, Papatawai on the other side, and there's still a track between the McLennan Bridge here, the Papatawai Bridge here, and down through the bush to the site. That's Les's 1957 photo from the Papatawai side across to Tākopa Rivermouth site that he usually called Papatawai in his material. This was dense podocarp forest, and that's what it looks like today. An aerial shot, Les went up in a plane in the 1970s and took some really good shots. So again, there's the site here, Papatawai to the right, and the bridge, the main road and bridge through here. Fairly deep trenches dug in this place, and difficult too because there were tree roots and that they had to dig through. One of Les's notes say that they dug 80 tonnes of spoil out of one of these trenches that they dug over time, of course. And they did have to sandbag to try and hold up the estuary creeping towards them, and it temporarily. And the erosion, of course, was quite dramatic and is still dramatic. Those are photos from the late 1950s of Les. Basically lots of probably what he was digging in has been washed away. These are my photos from late 2023. Same situation is going on, exactly the same situation as the sea, the estuary creeps into the previous site. Lots of moa bones were found at this site. Basically all six species that were inhabited the southeastern corner of New Zealand were found at this site. Oh, I've just done some more scribbles just to show you the sort of material that Les has left behind. Again, I've blown it up, and he draws little diagrams and bits and pieces of what he's finding, and as well as excavating at the main Takapa River mouth site, he found stuff here and down the river mouth as well, and showed evidence of occupation, evidence of them not staying necessarily in the same place but moving around to find the food and perhaps camping in various parts of the area. So I've got a second site to talk about, this one, Ponawea, which is the island, Manuka Point, was a point that became an island. And again, this was one that Les spent a lot of time at. This is a photo from the 1930s with the fledgling settlement of Ponawea here. Of course, the Owaka River on this side, Catlins River on the other side, and the estuary in here. And of course, the Owaka River wasn't cooperative in turning around the corner there. It wanted to go sort of straight ahead towards the sea to the left. And the fight was on to rescue stuff from this site as it began to disappear. This is the 1960s. They built a causeway before this across to the island, what became an island, but it was only a matter of time. And as I say, he did a lot of work in the 1960s to try and rescue what he could from the site before it disappeared. Another of the aerial shots from his trip in the plane. Not much left of the point here. There's still a wee bit of residue of island in the 1970s. This one probably early 70s. Cannibal Bay, False Island up here, and Surat Bay along here. So the main danger was in terms of the natural forces that are hard to beat. But there was a second danger, and I'll read from Les's notes. The district was regularly visited by curio buyers who exported material to Europe and elsewhere. Several large collections are known to have been sold. Almost all households in the district have collections containing some specimens from the island or nearby areas. So this was being raided as well in the early days. Again, disappearing, and as you can see, even these tall, massive trees were no match for the sea advancing. So Les did get a bit of help. Again, they tried to sandbank and hold it up, at least temporarily. Between visits, perhaps it might have lasted. And he got help in the 1960s, especially into the early 70s, to try and salvage what they could from school students on their camps at Ponawea. He would come down and help them and tell them all about archaeology and early Maori. So this last photo, close to the site's disappearance, late 70s, even early 80s, perhaps that one. Despite earlier and ongoing fossicking, significant numbers of artefacts were discovered from Ponawea, though there can be discussion about exactly when Polynesian navigators arrived. Les's work showed that there was no doubt there was settlement in this area for around 400 years, with people of a significantly different culture from classic Maori, a culture with more direct links to their Polynesian origins. Collections of artefacts in huge numbers from these two sites is Les's claim to fame number 3. I got a couple of slides here on identified some significant early Maori type artefacts that when he found these, he realised this had early Maori connections. The hog-backed axe, rounded back on the adze, was typically Polynesian. The real necklace is the other thing that they found hundreds, probably thousands of these necklace pieces. They're cylindrical sections of bone, found individually, of course. Where are we? There, found individually, but they would have been worn like this. And these are the only 3 photos that aren't from Les's collection. I've borrowed these from a book by Roger Duff, just to show you how they would have probably been worn as a necklace or around, and perhaps they were used sometimes as bracelets. This one in the middle, I'm not sure why I put that in, but that's porpoise teeth, again, probably used as a necklace. Fish hooks. Now I'm delving into really dangerous territory here because I know nothing about fishing, but I'll zap through this one. Looking at the time, I'm going to zap through this one quickly. Slabs of moa bone on the left get drilled out with a cord drill. A cord drill here, and these are the pieces that get cut out, and these are all been found in laser sites, drilled out, shaped round, and then finally the hook made by nicking out the bit at the top. That's the one-piece type hooks. There were also two-piece type hooks and lots, again, thousands of barbs. These barbs with an internal barb, which apparently is Polynesian. Somebody to tell me if I'm wrong later, but that is a Polynesian trait and fairly significant to identify things as early Maori. Again, these are two-piece hooks. They find the barbs and they find the shanks, and that's where that would have been lashed together as per the photo there. That's a reconstruction, of course. They haven't ever been found in complete in two pieces. So there was a tendency to think that barbs on hooks were a classic Maori item, but Les was able to establish that these barbed fish hooks were present before classic Maori times. So this is Les's claim to fame, number 4. So, in working out, I had to work out what bits of the story to tell you about, and I have to tell you about 3 lumps of rock. These are fairly significant rocks. The first was uncovered by David Teviotdale at King's Rock in January 1939, and that's the one on the right here. They're thought to have some sort of symbolic or mystical or religious significance. When Les saw it, he quickly recognised it as being similar to 6 morai stones that brought back from French Polynesia in 1930 by H.D. Skinner, who was in charge of the Otago Museum. And those were from morai, obviously really important stones. And Les saw the significance of those two pieces. Then one was found at Toitū in 1963, that's the one at the top, and a third one actually came to light on Stewart Island in 2015. The one on the left is the block from, one of the blocks from the Otago Museum. Now, geochemical analysis of these rocks show the same volcanic composition as rocks from a small area of the Pacific, only a small area of the Pacific. The team that did the analysis say they showed the most likely origin was Mahetia, a small island 100 kilometres east of Tahiti in the Society Islands. And a conference paper by the researchers into these blocks say these scoria blocks can be regarded as among the most important extant pre-European cultural items in New Zealand. They came directly from the islands and must have travelled came in the canoes, and they must have been important to bring these rocks. I understand these claims aren't necessarily wholly accepted, and I suspect perhaps because they were only found in the unimportant South Island area. But adding to the evidence, there is a place called the Punauia River on the west coast of Tahiti, and Papeatawai is a district on Moria in this area. So it's a hell of a coincidence if it isn't a case that one of these canoes or some of these people came directly to the south, not dribbling down from the North Island as was a traditional thought. I've just thrown in Sir Peter Buck's map too, of 1939, famous book Vikings of the Sunrise, where he has a direct line from the hub of the Pacific, as he saw it, through to New Zealand. Les is probably want to suggest that that line came to the south as well. So, Les's investigation was finished off by others, but the starting point to show the exotic origins of these blocks was Les's claim to fame, number 5. So as I've said, he was involved in several sites. In January 56, he was involved in an excavation at Toitū that was able to confirm that even the giant moa was here at the same time as early Maori. On the high ground of the peninsula between you had to get there by, well, 4-wheel drive now, but his little maps and the area is in this area here. Toitū, the giant moa bones were in a layer that were also found to have other moa bones and artefacts. Whoops, we go back. And there were clear links to early Maori settlement. And I'm going to let Les talk about moa a bit.
When they arrived here, moas must have been fairly plentiful. Moas ranging from about the size of a turkey up to ones that stood about 9 or 10 feet high that would have as much meat on them as a bullock, small bullock, and the femur and the tibia, and then the tarsal bone, tibia, to show you that there's the bone down here, the foot bone comes down there, and then would be the big tibia in here, and you've got, this would be the meaty bone, and you can imagine gnawing your chicken bone. You've got a chicken bone like that. Now that bird stood about anything from about 9 to 11 feet high, and as I said, it had as much meat on it as a small bullock. Eggs about the size of a football, and each egg from one of the largest moas would have about as the equivalent of about 10 dozen hen's eggs in it. So they had plenty of food from the moa side of it, ranging down to smaller moa. Then they had other birds such as the giant eagle, swan, and flightless goose, and ordinary bush birds that we find all through the bush area down here and over to the west coast. So they had plenty of food in that line. Then they had fish and shellfish and small birds.
So this is his diagrams of the find, and this Toitū find was significant. The South Island giant moa wasn't necessarily thought to have been present in New Zealand when the earliest Maori settled the land. So the finding this was Les's claim to fame, number 6. Right. By May 1957, at the New Zealand Archaeological Association conference, he was able to present these findings of what he'd managed to collect. And this was built as the bombshell conference, where he explained the collected theories of what he's worked out. And there were 4 things. I'm going to have to race, aren't I? that all these moa were here in early Maori time, that there was stratification, that moa hunter remains are clearly pre-classic Maori, and that the barbed fishhook was Polynesian. There were still people trying to say that Maori came from Melanesia or somewhere else, or Peru or something. So this was important to establish. So I've written all about, So he was a very busy man, but archaeology wasn't his actual job, right? Because as I've hinted at earlier, he was a teacher, and this is the schools that he worked at, with war service in between. And in his teaching also, he was a little out of left field. He acknowledged and even highlighted the importance of Maori in our history through his archaeology and in teaching aspects of Maori culture. He illustrated 2 books and that were used by schools for teaching such stuff, practical aids. I don't think I can claim that he was any sort of radical proponent. He didn't use te reo at home, but they were small but important steps of acknowledging Maori in New Zealand. So that's, I'm saying this is his claim to fame, number 7. And perhaps also in terms of being a bit out in left field, he took up the offer of the Minister of Education, observing a month in 1939 to suspend the ordinary curriculum and devote the time mainly to educational activities out of doors. So he was a bit of a pioneer in terms of outdoor education, because he used to take his students out as much as possible. It helped with his archaeology as well, of course, but it was he was an early adopter of those sort of ideas. And whenever you take kids out, isn't there always somebody waving a stick around? So this work, as in terms of his outdoor education stuff, was his claim to fame, number 8. And still, I'm nearly finished, and I haven't got to his actual job yet, because the actual job that he was known for, of course, was as education officer at the Otago Museum. After his war service, he went back to Macandrew Intermediate, and then he took up a position at the Otago Museum as education officer. And that's probably the job that impacts most on people personally, because he had a lot of contact with a lot of students and adults. So during his years at Museum Education Officer, he expanded the Museum Education Service, strong support from district schools. The Teachers College sent 12 students a month to the museum for teaching practice and to gain knowledge of the available resources. These trainee teachers enabled a huge number of educational visits by students. An article in the Otago Daily Times in August 1954 stated that on an average day, up to 12 more classes comprising 400 to 600 students are taught at the museum one day. Schools could request resources from the museum, and these were teaching ages for the classroom. One of the special ones that he was known for are these glass dioramas, and these were shunted around schools too. I've got one of them on the front desk here. I'll stand up in a minute and you can have a look at. The way people are nodding, it might be a bit of, for old time's sake, having a look at them, because some of you might have seen them before. In 1975, 1,500 loans to school were recorded and 33 new cases were built. They were something like the old display cases that he used to use in his classrooms. That one from Clinton, he sort of was good at displaying stuff. And in as I say, 33 new cases had to be built in 1975, and at their height there were over 200 cases in circulation. Three of them are now at the Owaka Museum. Or two of them are now, one of them's there. And in the words of the late Maureen Wiley, Waitaha, whose memory of Les I was privileged to get, she said when she was at primary school, thinking about primary school time, everybody was fascinated by the things that Les brought along in his education boxes from the museum. He used real things that were used by real people to teach us about the past. He had a special way with children, and there wasn't a child who wasn't impressed with his visits. The whole class was spellbound. So they had to cart them around the countryside. Yeah. So just a quick note on the genesis of the book. The real exercise halfway through 2023 was to set up a room dedicated at the museum to Les Lockerbie. The material that Les had left behind was in storage, and it was important to get that on display. And at a meeting in the middle of 2023, somebody said it'd be a good idea to have a bit of a couple of sheets on what Les was all about. And we thought we could collect a few memories of people. And I put my hand up and said, I could probably put a few pages together. And for the next 12 months, it got a little out of hand. And the book is the result, because it sort of didn't do justice to Les to just do a couple of memories and a brief outline of his career. So that's why the book has been written. But the real treasure is the room in the museum that's got lots of these artefacts and drawers and explains things really well. But I was able to get some very cooperative people. There are 17 memory stories from 15 people, associations with Les. They're bookended by Les's daughter, Frances White, at the front, and by Graham Collett, a very, very close friend of Les, at the back. And I'm really indebted to the resources available from Frances and the help that Frances gave me during this whole process. So that's how the room and the book came about. There's 75 people's names in the index, and it was interesting to find his connections with people like Sir Peter Buck, H.D. Skinner, Roger Green, James K. Baxter, Neil Armstrong, Sir Edmund Hillary, Prof. Robert Bell, and Sir Basil and Dr. Basil Howard. Tenuous connection sometimes, but there's a connection. There's 165 photos, documents and newspaper articles in the book, and I'm hoping the reader can see something of Les's effort, his enthusiasm and his character in those primary resources, as well as what I wrote as a text. So just quickly too, I'm going to tell you all the things I haven't told you about, because I could have had half an hour on each of these probably. He went to, and as I've said, Teachers College trips. He did a lot of work on Stewart Island with his students. He discovered stuff at Mahaka, work on the Maori site at Whareakiaki, Cannibal Bay, False Island, and North Island. He went to North Island. Whenever they went on family trips, they were really partly archaeological trips. He took the opportunities, and he knew lots of people around the country, of course, with his conferences and associations that he was at. So there's lots of stuff. In summary, I hope I've shown you that he was worth remembering. Spread the word about the Owaka Museum. Oh, I'm going to do a summary, wasn't I? That's right, the points of why he's really important. He contributed numbers to the museums. He began the scientific study of archaeology. He was at the forefront of carbon dating. He led to lots more knowledge about early Maori. He was an early promoter of Maori culture. He was a pioneer in outdoor education, and he developed what was acknowledged as a world-class education service at the museum here. So the Owaka Museum is a great trip down the coast. Go and have a look at it at some stage. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā katoa katoa.
Thank you, Malcolm. I think we definitely think that Les Lockerbie was worth remembering. Now, any questions?
Yeah, I've got one. How do you determine whereabouts you're going to dig for a site?
Yes. I wonder. Often there were surface indications. When he went to the Old Neck in Stewart Island, there were just moa bones and stuff just all over the surface that had been, the sand had been washed away, blown away. Places like Takaba River mouth, he had some contact with Maori that might have given him a general indication of the areas. As I say, he was in some of these areas from very early age, so he might have found the odd thing. But yeah, specifically where he went to dig and take out 80 tonnes of spoil, not too sure, sorry. But
Any other questions?
I've got one. There's no reference on your diagrams to human remains or human bones. Is that because of taste, or is that...
I didn't include any reference to or pictures of human bones because it is a sensitive subject to Maori. He did get into trouble a wee bit on Stewart Island, and one of the places where he was having a look at human remains, and the local Maori weren't too happy with him. But that's the reason why I haven't mentioned it. There were human remains in some of those sites that I've mentioned, but I haven't made a big deal of it.
And if I can say something,
yes.
He was determined never to touch the remains.
Sorry?
He left the remains.
He left things, yeah.
He covered them up.
Yeah. He covered up lots of these sites. Of course, he dug these holes, but he didn't leave the holes. They were often dug in again. Or even you dig out a bit and then go away for a day, but a couple of days or a week, you'd have to fill it in and then come back and dig it out again. He didn't sort of leave them exposed to friends and foe.
Any final questions? Well, I just say thank you very much. I found
Very
that
welcome.
fascinating. I shall
Yes,
be
thank
going
you.
down to the Owaka Museum when it's not so cold and having a really good look around. And you've got copies of the book for sale, and also people can have a look at that cabinet. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you.